today we are actually looking, I think, appropriately at the beginning of the year towards our future selves and a conversation on planning for dementia. And let me tell you about our conversational leaders here. And this will require glasses. So we have Dr. Cari Levy. Is it Levy? She's a professor of medicine, a board-certified internist, geriatrician, and health services researcher. Her research focuses on end-of-life care in nursing homes. She is here at the university, and she's was awarded in 2006 a VA Career Development Award in Health Services Research and Development, which allowed her to explore how end-of-life care is provided to veterans residing in nursing home care units. And one of our faculty, Dr. Jean Abbott, she's a board-certified emergency medicine physician. She's been a faculty member at the University of Colorado since the inception of emergency medicine in 1985. She's retired from EM practice, but she still teaches in the Denver Health Emergency Medicine residency on ethics and professionalism. She is very busy lecturing and teaching. She's active in helping create the ethics content for the new CU Palliative Care Master's Program, and she teaches and facilitates advanced care planning conversations through community presentations. So welcome to both of them. Come on in and find a seat.
This is one of those places that you can walk right through the middle.
Walk through. We don't want you to be shy, and I'm going to turn this over to Cari. Thanks, Cari.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you. Wow, there's some people who are interested in dementia.
Imagine.
Okay, so I'm Jean. This is a picture of my husband and me last summer in Copenhagen, being photobombed by my granddaughter. I didn't even know the term until this picture. That's how old I am. We've been married for 47 years. And as Tess said, I'm a recovering emergency medicine doc and happily working with palliative care and ethics.
And I'm Cari Levy, and I'm in the other picture, and I've not been married for 47 years, but I am 47 years old. Okay. And I married my pal from high school who turned 48 yesterday. And we have known each other almost all of our lives, and we don't have children. So there will be no granddaughter to photobomb us. And it has implications, of course, for caregiving. And so we'll talk about that as we move along. So that's probably enough background.
We can't claim to represent our various professions, although your geriatrics training certainly has informed you, my ethics, and actually my emergency medicine experiences, and certainly consults in the ER and upstairs have informed me. But we're from different generations, and we wanted to share that with you. We have a plan, of course, we have to have objectives, and eventually we're going to turn to you and see what you think of our ideas. So dementia is becoming more prevalent as we become older, and this graph sort of shows that by the age of 90, percentage of women, 30% will have dementia. Men, it's slightly less. When I talk in public groups about advanced care planning, almost always within about 10 or 15 minutes of the presentation, the question drifts to, but what happens if I get dementia? So it is becoming a bigger problem.
And just to further convince you that this is an important issue, hospice care is increasingly seeing dementia as one of its primary diagnoses. So about 93 days on average is a hospice length of stay for an individual with dementia. And you may have seen an article, actually, I think just this weekend, that talks about how many hospices, of course, are having to discharge folks because their lengths of stay are too long. And dementia, it's very hard to predict when someone has a short life expectancy. And so this is becoming an issue for hospices. To further the important...
Getting a little but it's up there.
Oh, is it up there? Oh,
Yeah.
shoot, because it's under the picture. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So the number of individuals with Alzheimer's currently is about 5.3 million, or in 2015 it was 5.3 million, and this is expected to triple over the course, thank you, of the next 30 years. So clearly, if you're interested in research, great place to be, because lots and lots of funding related to dementia, and lots of people who will be affected by dementia. And as Jean mentioned, 1 in 3 women by 90, but if you live to the age of 65 as a woman, you have a 1 in 6 chance of developing dementia. So obviously, very concerning to a lot of us, and particularly those of us who have family history, start to think.
Over 65, yeah.
Over 65, yes. And then those of us who have family history, of course, think a lot about this, and the financial burden to this of this disease globally, of course, is rather astronomical.
And as you pointed out, women are 2.5 times more likely to care full-time for somebody with Alzheimer's also.
So Jean and I have been talking about this for about a year. In January, I tend to think of things. And so last January, I started thinking about this. And we'll talk about what spurred it in a few more slides. But and then I reached out to Jean, as I respect her, and wanted her thoughts on the topic. And we've been dialoguing about this. And the person who comes to mind when I think about this issue is my grandmother. This is Grammy. And Grammy, very fun-loving person, lived in Greeley, Colorado, and spent the last 10 years of her life in a dementia care facility in Boulder. This was a phenomenal facility. They provided outstanding care. When we'd show up, we'd say, where's Betty? Where's Betty? And they'd say, oh, she's probably getting her nails done. Well, nope, she's not there. Well, she's probably having cookies in the bakery. Nope, she's not there. Oh, she's probably dancing in the dining hall. And inevitably, she'd be dancing in the dining hall. So she was active. She'd always been active. She'd always been social. And that continued into her phase of dementia. Note though, 10 years in a dementia care facility. Anybody have a guess at how much that was a month?
How much a month? Not a month. Not per month. 5,000.
Okay, $8,000, good guesses. $8,000 a month for 10 years, that's about $1 million that she ended up spending of her life savings on her care. She had amazing care. Perhaps that's what we save money for, is our final phase of life and having an amazing place to receive care, very loving caregivers. My aunt, her grandchildren, her children would go and visit. She had people to come visit her. And then she had excellent caregivers. And it spurred me to think about, well, with $1 million of mine, is that what I would spend it on? And we'll talk more about that.
So, as with Cari, individual stories and personal narratives are really begin to touch you. And I suspect a lot of you have people who have touched you with dementia, and we want to honor that, even though we're going to push in a slightly jocular way about this. But the one that comes home for me was my mother, the second picture here, Edith, who was a very smart woman who developed multi-infarct dementia, which ends up behaving sort of like Alzheimer's, but is sort of a stepwise little mini strokes that take out your cognitive function. And she had that for about 10 years. She started out in a retirement home and then went to assisted living and then went to nursing home care. And I think the time that it struck me most, being the daughter who was 2,000 miles away, was when I wheeled her into the recreation room at the assisted living place. And she had always been my best supporter, playing the piano when I was growing up and through my adulthood, and cheerleader for that. And I sat there and played the piano for her, and she had no clue that there was anything going on. And that really hit me. In the end, I think Benji, her very annoying Siamese cat, was the only thing that she really gave her any pleasure in life.
So I mentioned there was something that sort of triggered my thinking about this about a year ago. And what it was is at my place of worship, they had an event to talk about advanced care planning, and they showed the Frontline documentary, if you've seen it, about advanced care planning and Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal. And I had read the book, and I enjoyed the book and thought, oh, this will be really special to talk about it in the faith community and hear what people are thinking. And so I went, and I was struck by how each of the cases dealt with cancer. And people had time to plan, and they had time to think through things. And I thought, but what if time is not too short, but it's too long, and we can't plan actively because of dementia? Let's think about that. And that's where this whole conversation started.
And so I have to agree with that. As I look at it from a little bit more of an ethical lens, we love in this society the narrative of being in control. We think that we can be in control of our whole life. And the question is just, this is a mysterious thing. And dementia is a time in our lives when we can't be in control, when we don't have decisional capacity in a formal sense, but where things continue to drift. And I don't know what's going on in there in a memory unit. I visit some, and it's fascinating to see what might be happening in people's minds. You may recall a couple of years ago an Oregon story talking about, are we in control? This was a lady who was 61, I believe, had early onset dementia, and she was in a nursing home. She had advanced directives that said she wouldn't want to be supported if she could no longer interact, and if she had to be supported artificially. And her husband, who was her spokesperson, said she would not want to be fed once she can no longer respond to people. And the nursing home took them to court and said, you know something, when we bring a spoon up to her mouth, she opens her mouth. We're not going to not do that. We're not going to not feed her when she opens her mouth. Clearly she wants to have food. And the husband's pushback was, wait a minute, that's a reflex. That's a reflex she's had for 61 years. That's not wanting food. That's being a human who sees a spoon in front of you. And the nursing home won and continued to feed her. So sometimes we have this mythology that we can steer things, but it's a very gray area right now.
So when we started this conversation, I said to Jean, I have a plan. I've had a plan since 1990 when I first did my advanced directives in college, and then later translated those into a 5 wishes when 5 wishes became available, and nothing's changed, you know, and it never will. And Jean has pushed back, and Jean's tried to...
This is the debate.
This is where the debate started. So anyway, I have the 5 wishes that I originally completed. It's still in my drawer, and my the people who need that have that. And I have also been open to Jean's suggestions that perhaps that will not remain a stagnant document.
And so when Cari said this to me, I said, wow, that is not me. I think that my wishes have evolved over time and over experiences. You know, I used to climb 14ers all the time, and I don't climb 14ers anymore. But I sure do love getting out and hiking with the dogs, and that hiking will be shorter distances with succeeding years. And my goals have changed a fair amount. It's a heck of a lot more fun to be with family than when I was pushing professionally. And I spend a lot of time talking in the public about one of the pitfalls of advanced directives, of which you can see on the right, the Colorado Hospital Association forms that have the medical durable power of attorney and the living will and CPR directives for people, that those change over time. You have to revisit them because your priorities change and you adapt in ways that you might not think you'll adapt when you're 47. So mine have changed a bunch. I wonder how you'll feel when you're, I'm going to be 70 in 2 months, so.
Yes, so perhaps I will feel differently. And I certainly know from working in nursing homes that what was once something you didn't feel you could compromise on over time is very acceptable. And so I reserve the right to change. So thank you for that. And interestingly enough, when I've talked to others, my contemporaries, about this issue, they all had plans. And maybe some of you right now are thinking about what your plans would be in the event that you were to develop dementia. And I was shocked, actually, that most people had thought about this. And one of my friends, she had just gone through the death of her mother. She actually took a break from her career to care for her mother for 10 years, who had multiple sclerosis. And in the end, it developed a dementia related to that. And she said, well, here's my plan. She's a pretty tiny person. She said, I think I weigh about the same as a large dog. I think we treat our humans worse than we treat our animals. So I'm going to get a St. Bernard costume, and I'm going to get in it, and I'm going to go to my vet, and I'm going to say, put me down, because I think that's a more humane way to go than what I saw my mother go through. And of course, she was kidding, but she was half serious because she had just done this and didn't think it was a very humane ending for her mother. I have other friends who have talked about, well, I have this plan. I'm going to go around and say my goodbyes to all my friends over the course of a year, and then I will take care of myself. Okay, what do you mean by take care of yourself? Well, I'll take a lot of sleeping pills. Well, that often doesn't work. So, well, okay, so what I'll do is I'll use this new medical aid in dying thing that Colorado passed, right? Don't we have something in Colorado where you can just determine your final days? Not going to work in this situation. So nope, that's not going to work either. And so one by one, these friends would report these plans, and one by one, we'd sort of dissect what wasn't really going to work. And so it was a little fantasy about how things might go that probably isn't realistic.
Yeah, and Katie Butler has written about this in a book that's pretty fascinating and started out as a magazine article, but she talks about the fact that as a society and as a medical healthcare community, we have created an ever longer sort of gray zone that she talks about between living and death. And we aren't sure yet how to navigate that. We're really struggling. We don't have language. We don't know how to approach it. I also have heard Ray Barfield, a pediatric oncologist, talk about the fact that in medicine, we're very good at keeping the molecules moving, but we don't have a bigger picture of what life means than this biological sort of collapsed atomistic version of what life is. So we're struggling, I think, as a society. So this is my brothers and me. Believe it or not, I'm the oldest. And we actually get along together. We also have enough funding that we could support my mother through her years of dementia. And at one point, about 6 years along, my mother got a bladder infection. Typical woman, frequent kind of thing. So I called my brothers up because my mother wasn't happy being here. She'd lost our dad 6 years before that. And I said to them, do you want to treat this urinary tract infection? Why wouldn't we treat a urinary tract infection? You know, our wives get those all the time. You give them antibiotics, they get better. And I said, well, it's a choice. She's not enjoying life very much right now. They said, well, of course you're going to give her antibiotics. So even though I had the medical durable power of attorney, those are the people that I have to live with and I have to continue to care about. And so we treated her for her urinary tract infection. And about 6 weeks after we did that, one of them called me up and said, I get it, I think. Next time, maybe we don't have to treat the urinary tract infection. It takes a bit to go through these choices that seem like they're not choices and realize that, yeah, it is a choice and that the context makes a whole lot of difference in terms of what your medical choices might be.
And similarly, this is my aunt who's reading her Bible she was featured in the Boulder Daily Camera. That's where I got this picture. But anyway, she had a similar situation face her with my Grammy, who had been dancing and getting her nails done and having a ball for many, many years. And did I mention she gained 30 pounds from eating all the cookies? Because she would go by the bakery and say, oh, I'd like a cookie. And then she'd go by the bakery 10 minutes later and go, oh, a cookie, fabulous, I'd like another cookie. So she
actually new friends all the time, right?
Yes, exactly. And so when she would fall or have some of the things happen that happen to older folks, she wouldn't break anything because she had this great hip protector of padding from her cookies. But anyway, so she was doing quite well in terms of her mobility and that kind of thing, and actually had zero medication and zero issues, except she fell in love and someone fell in love with her and they wanted to get married. And what do you do with that in a memory care facility? But anyway, that was really the only big family decision that
we'll not go there today.
We're not going to go there. Not today. Anyway, so other than that decision, the other major decision that came along was when she developed a pneumonia. So it was getting a little bit harder for her to eat, and she probably had an aspiration event where she developed a pneumonia. So my aunt calls and says, we should send her to the hospital, right? And I said, well, let's talk about this. She's with people she's known for 10 years who care for her and know her and love her. And taking her to the hospital will be people who don't know her, will be sticking needles in her and doing things that are uncomfortable. She'll be very disoriented, and it will not make her likely happy to do that. And we'll have another event like this. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not the next week, but we'll have another event. And we have the option right now of keeping her with the folks who have cared for her and she knows and she's familiar with. And she loved her room. She thought she had the most fabulous room on the planet. And she would talk about it every time you went in, how she could look at the school children across the way. And so let's keep her in her room where she knows the people, she knows the view of the kiddos. And that's what we did. And she was enrolled in hospice, and she was an outlier. Unlike those who normally have a 90-plus day stay, she had a 3-day stay. So she was one of these folks with a very short length of stay. But hospice came in and provided end-of-life care in the final moments. But these were the decisions that no one had anticipated. And of course, we're going to send her to the hospital. That's what people do when people get sick.
What's the treatment for pneumonia?
Hospital.
Right.
Right.
All right. So you've been dealing with this in your professional life.
Yes. So we find sometimes it's hard for people to think about decisions in a theoretical way. And so we developed this tool that is very colorful, and it's laminated so people can write on it with a pen, an erase pen. And we'll say, okay, this is a serious illness you're coping with. Let's talk about the limited time, the limited resources, and the limited energy that you have, and make sure we're investing that in activities that matter to you, and that we're not spending a lot of time on things that are not important to you, and really start to think about how things are managed. And what we found is that people engage with this tool. They start circling things, they start writing things down, they start just expanding on some of the topics here, like they'll say CPR, I've told people 1,000 times I don't want CPR. Or they'll say pain control, yes, circle it, do that. Okay, we'll focus on that. And then interestingly, one of the really profound moments we had was a gentleman who was in our psychiatric unit because he had said, this illness is too much, I don't want to live any longer. And so when he made that statement, he was placed on a suicide hold, he was put in the psychiatric unit, and his wife was sitting there, and our job as palliative care docs that day was to figure out if he had an eye towards the future, if he could think about his future and have goals for the future. And so we showed this to him, and he was almost catatonic. Before we went in, he was sitting in the hallway, not speaking, not interacting with staff. And we got a private room. His wife was sitting there, and interestingly enough, his disease was such that he couldn't move a lot, and then he was very just depressed and didn't want to move a lot. But he managed to pick the thing up, he got his hands to the table, and he knew enough. I don't know how he knew this, because nobody knew this, but on the back of the form were 2 columns, and one was the most important, and one was the least important. And so he knew enough to turn, he must have seen it when I was putting it down or something, to turn it over. And he wrote on the least important column first. And he said, fighting with wife. They had been fighting incessantly because of his illness, and he couldn't do things and he wanted to do things, and she was upset because she didn't know how to handle this big change he'd had in his functional status, and so they'd done nothing but fight. And that was really the origin of his depression and his will, his, lack of a will to live. So the reason we bring this up is to help perhaps you all start to think about a least important bucket and a most important bucket, because sometimes it's hard to articulate until you start thinking of it in those terms.
And luckily, there's starting to be more tools like the one you use, which is really cool because you're doing it face-to-face, for people to start playing with this idea of what matters most. I seem to recall that you're pretty passionate about not wanting to spend it in waiting rooms.
Correct. So I have, of course, gone through this because it's part of the job, right? And I hate hospitals. I know that's a little bit of a funny thing to say when I work in a hospital, but I hate hospitals when it's for my own purpose. If I'm there caring for someone, it's fine. But if I'm there for myself, get me out of this place. So yes, that was on my least favorite bucket, was waiting rooms in hospitals. Yes. Thanks for reminding me.
All right. So don't we have new ways of controlling our ending? That's the question that I get whenever I'm talking in public to people who are thinking about dementia. They, first of all, think that the form on the left, the most form, is something that they can use to translate their wishes into orders. And that is true. And it can be done by a surrogate. So if you get demented, Cari, then whoever is speaking for you could make those choices. Do you want CPR? Do you want to go to the ICU? Do you want to be intubated?
But wouldn't that be hard for them?
It is hard. And we're starting to learn a lot more about the burden of surrogate decision making. People feel that's a hard thing to do. It's easier if you've talked about it, if you've played with something like your bucket tool, but it's a hard thing for surrogates to do. In addition, as Cari mentioned, medical aid in dying is, why don't people with dementia qualify for medical aid in dying? They can't make a decision. Exactly. You have to have decisional capacity in order to request it, in order to take the meds. You have to be able to take the meds yourself. So all of the people, and half of people near the end of their life, are not capable of making decisions on their own. Sometimes that's because of an acute serious illness, but sometimes it's because of dementia. And so that is not in the cards.
Right. And so that's where this all comes full circle. Saw the documentary, the Frontline documentary, said, oh, gee, if you've got time to plan, that's one thing. But if you don't, and you don't have the ability to plan, then how the heck do you do this, right? It's clear that a lot of folks want to have control in this situation. So how can you have control? So I came up with a personal plan, and Jean came up with a personal plan. And we will now walk you through our personal plans. So, the first, and of course the hope is that in speaking about our own plans, this can help translate to the work that you do, and then perhaps the personal, cases you might be coping with, and hopefully illustrate some of the big milestones. The first is to complete an advanced directive, which, as you heard, I did in 1990, and have updated a little bit, but mostly it's the same. And it names my spouse as my medical power of attorney. And then I have a dear friend who's an emergency room physician. I must really like emergency room physicians. And she's my alternative.
Do it.
Yeah, that's right. Right. I figure between the two of them, they can get stuff done. So she's my alternate. I've described on that document what matters most, and it includes what's called a dementia provision. So specifically in the case of dementia, here are the things I would or would not want done. As you heard, though, Jean had a case, from Oregon where all of that was available and still wasn't enough. So at the first sign of memory loss, so everybody in my orbit knows that I worry a lot about this, and they are to tell me when I'm starting to slip. And at that moment, before I am formally evaluated, important piece of information, I film a video. And my team here might have to help me since they're the video team now, but I film a video and it talks about my values. And my hope is that in doing this, it actually will be a good, durable document beyond paper that will have my personal feelings and values and personality in it. I will then complete a MOST form. MOST forms are designed for people who have serious illness. It is a medical order for treatment. I probably will say that I don't want hospitalizations. Right now, of course, that's not appropriate. If I fell over in front of you now, I'd want you to scoot me over and take me to
That's really important for us to know,
thanks
Cari.
for that. Yeah.
I was wondering.
But at this point, I would complete my MOST form and I would talk about what I did and didn't want in the event of life-threatening conditions. And then I would have this discussion with my power of attorney and my alternate to make sure they understood very clearly what my wishes were around the MOST form. I would also obtain an emergency medication kit. For those of you who work in hospice, you know about this. It contains generally the things you need as you're facing symptoms that might be troubling at end of life. And this is where my ER doc friend comes in, because she can hopefully obtain this for me. And that way we'll have it available in the home. A lot of interesting things happening here, right? Then I will go to my trusted and true neuropsychologist to have formal testing done so that I can understand where I am in the course of dementia. Maybe I don't have dementia at all. Maybe I have anxiety and depression that needs to be treated and I will suddenly not have dementia anymore. But I will get formal testing done such that if I do, we can detect it and we can monitor it over time. I will also at this time identify a caregiver who has caregiving experience, who I trust, who I can start pulling into my care over time. So that's at the first sign of memory loss. Yes, Jackie? Well, my surrogate could do it if it's too late. Oh, my surrogate is a doctor.
Nice little loophole there.
And then if I can do it, I'll do it. I may not be completely unable to have a decisional capacity at this point. I'm hoping people will let me know pretty early in my course that I'm having difficulties. Could be early enough. I could do it now. We toyed with that. I thought it would be more powerful if it were temporal to the time I was getting the testing done.
Oh, she'd need another physician to sign it, but she has all sorts of connections. Different.
So, and then finally, when I am unable to function independently in the community, and I have a couple of different ways I've defined this, this is one of the key points. I will stop taking my life-prolonging medications. How is it troublesome? So my caregiver will be instructed to stop giving it to me. They will have been instructed to do that. And that's why we have put them in step 2, to be involved in all of that planning and know when the trigger is to stop giving me my life.
And know that they'll buy into your game plan.
That's the hope. Then, and I actually do have a life-prolonging medication. I take Synthroid. I don't have a thyroid. If I don't take it long enough, I will eventually not live because of that. And then that caregiver will document my physical function, my weight, and my symptoms that will ultimately justify hospice eligibility. And when everybody involved feels like my life expectancy is less than 6 months, I will be enrolled in hospice. The point of going through this is that this all is contingent on me being embedded in the medical community, having people who get this, having thought about this ad nauseum, and documenting it in, 7 ways to Sunday. It's really hard, really, and it may not work. Precisely. Jean.
So actually, Cari provoked me to think about this too, and to think about counters to it. and why I feel like I need to push back at this. So we've already heard a little pushback here, haha. Okay, so I agree that the most important thing to do, and how many people here have a documented MDPOA right now? Well, that's a little better than the public conversations that we have, but not very good, guys. Everybody of age, and that includes everybody in this room, should have figured out who they want to speak for them if they can't do it. And I don't care whether it's a mountain bike and you doink yourself on the head, or whether you've got a life-threatening illness and that you'll recover from and you can't make decisions at the time. And there need to be backups. And I'll outline my wishes and values. I'm not very big on written advance directives. But there are tools out there for values conversations, the Conversation Project, Prepare for Your Care, Get Your Shit in Order, I think. What is it, Amos, that Jeannie Youngworth likes? There's a bunch of websites, there's a bunch of places to do that, and to share that not only with whoever I choose as my MDPOA, but the others, because you know something, even if they know what I want, it's really, really important that other people can support them and say, yeah, we agree that this is tough, but you're doing the right thing, okay? And then when I get my first signs of memory loss, which is possibly happening now, I don't know, I think the most important thing is to say, you know something, to my MDPOA and my loved ones, this is really difficult. I'm very clear on my values, but there are too many variables for me to be able to dictate my ending. And therefore, it's more important for me to respect their choices than exactly to do what I think they should do right now. Because I want their decisions to be in my framework, but I don't know what those decisions are. And I really think it's pretty mysterious about it. There are some advanced directives for dementia, like one's by a guy named Gaster that came out about last year, and I have the websites on a handout out by the desk if anybody's interested in this kind of stuff. There are dementia directives, like Cari said, from Compassion and Choices. Washington State has a really nice one on their website. Gaster, does New York have one now too? Oh, good. Thank you, Constance. So I will fill out an advanced directive. Now, advanced directives don't have any legal standing. You have to realize they're an expression of wishes and values in a way, but nobody has to honor them. But to me, like for Cari, the more we have documented about what's important to us, what makes life meaningful, the better off we are. And be sure that my loved ones understand that my values are that not being able to interact with other people and experience some joy is not a life for me. Now, every time you do surveys of the public, 10 or 15% of people think that every day on Earth is sacred, even if it's hooked up to machines, even if it's what I would call biologic life only. So it's important to share where that cutoff is for you. What is worse than living? What is okay kind of living? And I actually believe that it's going to change. I think that I will compromise in ways that I can't predict even now. So when I'm unable to independently function in the community, make sure my loved ones understand that keeping me comfortable, avoiding hospitalizations and treatments that are only going to extend my biologic life or are going to cause discomfort are priorities to be used to measure any interventions that they propose. And please don't do CPR when my heart stops. My life has been rich, and CPR was invented for hearts too young to die. Would you believe that? Way back in the 60s. And now it's done for everybody except for a default. I've already been there. So I'm not interested in CPR, so that they understand that.
And as we pointed out, this is all the best laid plans and could go not as planned. So this is a book, Natural Causes, Life, Death, and the Illusion of Control by Barbara Unreich. And she talks about how a lot of this is determined by things we have zero control over. So it's fun to talk about, fun for weird people like us, I guess. But it's interesting to talk about, and obviously on the minds of many of my colleagues and many of my friends. And so that's why we were hoping to have the conversation with you today, recognizing that there are potentially many holes in this plan. And this will be published, our more sort of written out version of this will be published in February, and I suspect we will get a lot of feedback like what Jackie's is saying now, and that's the hope, right, to start generating conversation about this.
Yeah. And I don't think we actually are all that far apart. I think, Cari, for you, control is much more important than it is for me. I would like to trust my family. The teacher part of me comes out here. I want to teach my family how to make decisions. I want them to grapple with the kinds of choices that align with my values. And so what they actually do is not as important to me as is empowering them to start thinking about this themselves and then to help me get the best death that I can have. So we've all, unfortunately, seen the not so pretty ways in which people's endings have happened lately with advances in technology. We seem to be able to extend life, sometimes biologic life, but we aren't very good at backing off of it yet, although I'd like to hope that the pendulum is swinging. Am I being over-optimistic, dear?
Hard to know.
Okay. But I think that it's a complicated business, and I agree that we don't have as much control as we think we do, but I think both of us actually want our values honored. We don't want to put an undue burden on the people that we love, and it's a brave new world out there. So.
Yes, and I just wanted to round it out by saying, you know, one of the reasons I enjoy palliative care so much is it does bring the focus into what matters and really does highlight the preciousness of the life we're living right this moment. And that's what we were going to end on here is Tell Me, What Is It You Plan to Do with Your One Wild and Precious Life by Mary Oliver. And now we hope to talk to you about your thoughts and get your pushback and feedback. So we've got a couple of prompts here. What worries you? What plans have you considered? And what
Tess, you want to give them the microphone instructions in case they haven't done this before? Better use it right yourself.
Okay, just going to double check here. It's not too loud. So if you have a question or comment, please hold the microphone, the button down and speak into the microphone.
And keep your hand down, and then when it's red, you're speaking. So give us some comments. Tell us what's wacky about this. What are you worried about? Go ahead.
For those of us who haven't put much thought into any of this topic, how do you actually declare a medical power of attorney?
You can do many, many different things, but the easiest one is to grab one of these pamphlets from the Colorado Hospital Association, and one of the forms in there that you just pull out is for to assign a medical durable power of attorney. It's an interesting question. Who would you like to speak for you if you can't speak for yourself? Some people, it's a spouse, it's a friend. Some people avoid their family like the plague and choose a friend instead. Think about it. Who would best speak your values? And then a couple of backups in case they go trekking in Nepal. Why don't you?
Our colleague Hillary Lum has really thoughtfully completed this web page, coloradocareplanning.org, that really is lay language, walks you through a map and questions to consider, frequently asked questions. It's designed to be a one-stop shopping place, coloradocareplanning.org.
Plans the forms are linked to there, and you can print them out.
Can I just encourage all my young friends in the room to actually do this? Because My mom worked in a hospital setting where she was responsible for home care planning, lots of those sorts of things. And she always said it was the young patients who came in, not the geriatric patients, because it was all of us who hadn't actually done any of this planning. And we just thought, oh, our spouses can do it, not without you writing it down.
Right. In Colorado, we have a weird law. It's sort of a cool law, but your spouse is not automatically the one who will speak for you if you have one. They sit at the table with an equal stance to everybody who cares about you, including close friends, your cousin from Peoria, and a few other people like that. And they all have equal voices in terms of discerning who's going to be the best one to speak in your voice.
Because you've earned our respect with a great presentation, I'd like to push you a little bit and go back to the case that you mentioned about the couple in an extended care facility. And the hypothetical is you've got good advance directives, you've reached end-stage dementia, which means you don't recognize anybody, and because there's no treatment yet, no drug trials, I'd like to know what today, not 2 weeks from today, you would do if they said, I don't want you to feed my wife of 60 years anymore. And then I'd ask you to poll the audience, and I look around, the average age of this audience is probably under 40, and see what we all might do faced with that dilemma today after your presentation.
So after you're talking about, you're the provider in the nursing home, and you are being told by the husband not to feed my wife, who has to be spoon-fed, but doesn't yet need a feeding tube or anything like that, can still swallow. How many people would honor that husband's request?
Let's also say that that's her request in advance directives, even though she's no longer she.
Right. He's speaking in her voice, is saying, don't feed her. Okay, again. Wow, that's interesting. That's, what's your thoughts?
Sure.
It's very
higher.
hard.
I wish it was higher. Things that you didn't focus on with your dilemma, 10 years. No one likes to talk about this because human life is so valuable. The cost to certain families wipes them out.
Yep. So I didn't talk about that. Thanks for bringing it up. So she had the resources to do this. By the end, she almost didn't. So she had almost wiped out her entire life savings paying for the care, the memory care facility. And so the family, my aunt, who you saw in the photo, she was grappling with what do we do next, because they were going to have to liquidate a bunch of assets and of their own to try to pay for this facility. They desperately didn't want to move her from this facility. And the alternative, if for those of you who aren't familiar with it, you end up spending down. So there's this thing called the spend down, where you spend all of your money until you are at poverty level. Then you qualify for Medicaid, and Medicaid will pay for a nursing home. Wouldn't pay for this lovely memory care facility she was in. It would be a nursing home that she would have to move to, which would be very disruptive after she'd been there for so long. So thank you for bringing that up. And many families don't start out with $1 million in assets that they can then spend down. So most folks will go to the memory care facility for a short time. When the funds are gone, then they have to switch to a nursing home where Medicaid is the primary payer. And with all the discussion right now about Medicaid and what's going to happen with healthcare reform, this is one of the populations I worry about every day because a lot of us depend on Medicaid to cover nursing home expense.
And I think the reason that there's pushback from some of the healthcare facilities is an issue and a thread that kicks around in the ethics literature, which is, does your character change when you have dementia? Is there a difference in who you become? And the people who work in memory care oftentimes cite the fact that they have people who are happy. And whether it's happy watching Gilligan's Island reruns or what, they aren't upset. And so the question is, why would you cut their lives short, is what their pushback is, and why this causes moral distress among a lot of care providers.
And the point of talking about that advanced care plan that was, written in 1990 was that one of the major themes in there was not burdening others, either financially or emotionally or physically, with the care of me. And so that's the thread through all of this, is that that would become all of those things if it went on for a long time.
And at least at this point, if I'm happily demented, I still don't want my life extended, because I don't want that resource utilization when there's a choice between that and a granddaughter going to graduate school or college or whatever. Yes? Yeah, the Gaster one is actually quite interesting in that it sort of breaks things into a 3x4 table. It defines mild dementia, moderate, and severe dementia, and then says that each of those levels, would I want full court press, be admitted to the hospital, be treated at my place of residence, or just be made comfortable, kind of a spectrum of care, which allows you to sort of say, you know what, mild dementia, actually I could use a little of that right now with the political situation the way it is. If I forgot some of it, it would be nice. It sort of gives you a spectrum. And again, it's not legally valid, but it gives support to the very difficult choices that surrogates have to make. Yes.
From the standpoint of family medicine, one of the things that we probably could do a lot better for patients is to make advanced care planning a part of our annual health maintenance, or if not annual, decennial, I don't even care. But why I used to tell all my patients, at age 50, we're going to talk about two things, whether you like it or not. One is colonoscopy, and the other is advanced directive. And whether you need it or not, I don't care. We're just going to do it once this time and kind of lay the land. And then I'm going to be the resource for you to come talk, answer questions like, what the hell is dementia anyway? And do I have it? And if we were able to help people navigate you're lucky you got 15 doctors that are your, powers of attorney. And I say that with sort of mixed enthusiasm, but I have 15 doctors in my family, and I'm not really sure. But yes, professionally, we should do that. Put it on the agenda as one of those useful services that we can provide to, especially geriatric, but also anybody.
No, and the biggest problem is, and I have been going around, and some of my colleagues have been going around to teach providers in private offices how to have these conversations at various levels. I want to highlight the fact that you and my colleague Emmy Betts in the ER are working on an initiative to have conversations about when should we take the keys away from you? When should we lock up your guns so that you don't have them? Those are very practical aspects of this descent into dementia, if you would.
So I work in the VA, and the average veteran has 6 guns, and at any given time, one is unlocked and loaded. So this is a really important thing for our veteran community. Yes.
Go ahead.
Just to follow up on the gun thing, I do the firearms training for the ED teams at Children's and Anschutz and Denver Health and the health department. And we're trying to help doctors learn what the scripts are to have this discussion with people. And I'm trying to get articles into the gun literature, because medical literature is irrelevant. The gun literature, and the title of the articles is along the lines of, when your time comes, how do you want this conversation to go? And the conversation is, Grandpa, we don't think you're safe anymore. Who do you want that conversation to come from? Would you like to delegate that person now? Put the label on the front of the gun safe? We don't know how to do this yet. And we're inviting colleagues, please, you want to join in on this, send me an email. But we're going to get a script for docs in ED and geriatrics for this.
My great-grandmother died of dementia, with dementia. My grandmother did. And my mother is now dealing with it and has had it for what I believe is at least 10 years. And her doctor finally agreed to test her about 6 years ago and agreed that she had begun. He never did have the discussion about stopping driving. Last summer, I insisted upon going to her doctor's appointment with her, and he'd been seeing her, knowing she had dementia, alone for those 5 years, and with no other adult in the room because she insisted nobody could come. I went and I made him tell her to stop driving. My dad still lets her drive if she just follows him when he's driving a vehicle in front of her. I don't know how we get this to change. I don't live in the same state, so I can't call the sheriff and say, my mom's on County Road such and such right now. Would you go get her? So what do we do when we can't get their own medical care providers to support us in this?
Well, I bet Cari has a slightly different answer than me. My answer is that I'm talking to the public because I think this has to be a grassroots thing, and I think family members have to speak up to the docs because the docs are not doing enough, and they have incredibly time constraints, and they're supposed to ask about seatbelts and helmets and all sorts of other stuff. And it's very hard to do the advanced care planning. It's helped a whole lot for Medicare to have an actual billing code for just sitting down and having planning conversations. Whether you're sick, whether you're well, whether it's the family or the patient, they can now bill for this. But
yeah, it often comes down to practical things the family initiates. The docs often can't help. Like in Colorado, there's nothing I can do. I can write a letter, but it's not binding to the DMV. And so it comes down to removing the battery from the car and saying, gosh darn it, that car is broken again. What are we going to do? Sometimes people are smart enough to figure that out, and that becomes a problem. But if you can disable the car somehow, it sounds like you've got 2 cars in the household, so that's trouble. If you can have a direct conversation, if you can place the keys in an unfindable place, if you can do various levels of thwarting the driving, essentially, that's often what it takes. It's not easy. There is nothing easy about this.
There isn't. 3 weeks before my mother died with her dementia for 10 years, I got a call to say, can we take her to the hospital to do a fluorescein angiogram on her eyes? And I said, why are you doing that? And they said, well, because she's got macular degeneration. I said, she hasn't been able to read or watch a TV for 2 friggin' years. Why are you doing that? And who did you get consent from? Because I had her MDPI. Well, she said yes. And, she was a very proper lady who would say yes to anything. And it's like, yeah.
And you think of constraints on the medical profession, and your suggestion after this compelling story, this was part of the Affordable Health Care Act until Sarah Palin said death panels. And
she set us back a few years, but we're getting back there.
And by the way, my great-grandmother drove over another car, and that was the final event that caused her to lose her license. There was no one in the car, thank goodness, and she didn't notice. But the police did, and they followed her home and said, did you realize what happened there? And she, no, what? No, me? And then that was ultimately where they physically took the license away from her, and that had no legal binding, but she didn't know that. And that was enough to make her stop driving.
We're out of time. And I don't know if the two of you have a few minutes to spare for questions and comments. If you want to step forward and speak with them. Thank you both. This was an extraordinary conversation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.